Great, thanks everyone. And firstly, I'd just like to say how much I would have loved to have been there in person, but unfortunately, traveling from Australia these days is not particularly easy. So hopefully in 2022, I'll get to meet many of you in the future. But I'm here to talk about the land sector and issues of estimating emissions and removals and creating mitigation actions for that area. And I'm from the Mullion group to describe the company, and our product is flintpro. I'd like to start with looking at what the three areas are of the challenges that we face in the land sector. Now, the first ones are fairly obvious, hopefully, to everyone in the room. There's a lot of net zero commitments that need to be met, and the land sector is going to play a key role in that, both in emissions reductions, but also in sequestration into trees and into soils, for example. We have a whole lot of other issues around halting biodiversity loss. That's driving a whole lot of reporting needs on ESG, climate risk reporting, but also driving new markets. So that's a really big push over the last 2 years. I've been involved in climate change and the land sector now for over 20 years, and I can say that the shift has been enormous in the last 18 months to 24 months. And it's really driving down addressing these needs now. This has created some really interesting aspects of what the operational needs are for reporting systems for estimating these greenhouse gas emissions. And that is that previously people were largely focusing on just producing some past emissions, maybe doing an Excel sheet, but that's no longer really relevant. We're really looking at things like how are you going to estimate not just your past emissions, but also do projections, scenarios, cost benefit analysis, look at all the different accounting rules, potentially standards and markets, and not just looking at a piece of land like some forest or some agriculture, but actually looking across a landscape and thinking about it as a connected, holistic piece of land to be managed. That then comes into the third issue. Those operational needs are now completely driving the data and system needs that we're seeing around the world. So a huge push on operational remote sensing data, primarily from satellites. And I know that the team from Space Intelligence is presenting later today, I believe. They're a classic example of how do you take this science and bring it into an operational system to support the land sector. How do we bring in more ground measurements? How do we create all of these links? But most importantly, down the bottom, how do we actually turn this into a system? How do we actually turn all of this data into a framework that can be used by companies to make decisions? When we're thinking about the land sector, we need to think about integration and collaboration. There is actually no one technology that is going to get us over the line for doing this. And this table here shows that what I mean in this case. There's these technologies of remote sensing and models and GIS, geographic information systems and ground data across the top. Down the side here, we have all of the types of things we're trying to measure and estimate and how those things work. And for some things, like land cover, remote sensing is fantastic, but for projections and scenarios, less so. Given that there's no one technology, the challenge then becomes how do we actually integrate all of these different types of methods to actually produce the results we need? And this is where flintpro comes in. flintpro is our online integration platform. It's the only kind of integration platform of its type in the entire world. And what it does is it takes products from all of these different providers, the Space Intelligences, the TerraPulses, the SIBO labs, for example, from remote sensing, a whole series of models, and a whole lot of other information from farm management data, for example. And it brings it into one place and integrates it, creates the results that you require, and provides them out the back end for users. And so this is a really interesting space because the integration space has largely been left to governments to date. It hasn't been addressed in the private sector. And this is the issue that we're trying to address with flintpro. This is the core framework of flintpro. And where its real strength sits is in the middle part here. What we can do, unlike other systems, is we can run all different types of models and data all in one single place. And what this means is that we can run everything from full global simulations to individual fields or paddocks in a farm, all in the one framework, all using a consistent set of data and all using different outputs. So you could start looking at carbon or finance or biodiversity. This core piece of integration is the strength of flintpro. So just to show that this is real, I thought I would put up a couple of really useful examples for people to understand. So this example here is where we've used flintpro to support government policy in climate change. It's an area of in New South Wales. It's a very large area. It's the entire state in Australia. And in this case, we were asked to come in and assess what's the impacts over the entire region of deforestation, timber harvesting, fire and reforestation since World War II, and then also project forward. What's the opportunities for carbon sequestration? What if we change management? What if we come in and we plant more trees in this region? But also, what are the risks of that? What's the risk of increased fire, for example, damaging those plantations in the future and losing that carbon back to the atmosphere? And so this was one very, very large simulation, but was also very locally relevant. So we could actually run individual areas across the entire landscape. Another example is looking at supply chains. So this is a project that we've done in Jambi in Indonesia. And this was to look at the impact of oil palm plantations across Jambi. So what we've done here is, again, we've done a very, very large analysis. But during that analysis, we've also done individual analysis on every single oil palm concession area across that entire region. And what that allows us to do is look at the emissions profile through time of those areas and allow companies to start thinking about which areas and which concessions they should be sourcing from to try to reduce their emissions profile for their entire country, entire company, sorry. The next use case comes down to an even smaller scale again. This is supporting carbon project developers. And this is an example in Australia where the Emissions Reduction Fund, which is a compliance level emissions trading system or reverse auction system at the moment, where you have multiple people from the land sector trying to put projects in to get trees back into the landscape. This is a very difficult process, especially on the estimation. And previously, processes were taking 3 to 4 days per project. Whereas with flintpro, we can do all of the projects, including all of the regions around them, in less than an hour. And what this means is that the cost of doing these projects is reduced greatly and makes it far more economic and allows you to push into areas that previously you wouldn't have been able to afford to do these projects in. And finally, coming down to the smaller scale, as I mentioned before, the individual paddocks or the individual farms. And this is actually the world's first attempt to actually link farmers directly to carbon markets. It's a program called the Agricultural Stewardship Program for Carbon and Biodiversity. It supports tree planting through carbon. And in this case, this interface shows where individual farmers can access this system. They can simply draw a polygon on a piece of land, and flintpro goes back and it analyzes that piece of land. It tells you how much of that is eligible to be planted and gives you the emissions removals estimates for the future so that you'll be able to say at this age, here's how much carbon credits I will have, and you can then enter the market. So again, this is taking a process that once took farmers or consultants in particular with farmers a couple of days to finish and dragged it down to approximately 10 to 20 seconds to complete. So with that, I'll stop, but I'd like to just have a quick 3 summary points that would be great for everyone to take out of this. The first one is that there is no silver bullet for this issue. There isn't one piece of technology, be it a satellite or a model or some ground measurement technology that's actually going to solve this. The only way to solve this is through integration and collaboration. Then we can actually achieve what we need to do. The second point I'd like to focus on is making the science operational. There's lots of great research out there. There's lots of great models. There's lots of great people, for example, working in remote sensing algorithms. There are very, very few groups like the Space Intelligences and the TerraPulses of the world that are actually working on taking that science and moving it into an operational context that can actually be used inside a system like flintpro. And that piece really needs a lot more work in the future. And so I really stress that those are the presentations you should look at today if you're interested in the land sector. But finally, is that flintpro is here to support these processes. It's not there to replace those products. It's there to actually take those products and then turn them into the usable information that we require. By having a generic framework like this, we can actually really achieve our goals. And that's the whole purpose of flintpro. So thank you very much for your time, and very happy to take questions. Thank you very much.